I'm so excited to hear this very important conversation. This is a topic that I think is incredibly important, using nonviolent communication in a violent world. So we're going to hear from Raindev, a human being human. Raindev is an AbFab, gender-free LGBTQ voice, talent, and activist featured in BuzzFeed, Elle, CNN, NBC, and the list can go on and on. Recipient of the 2021 Alan Turing Award for Excellence in Leadership and a featured TEDx speaker on gender equality. A person known for modeling all gender expressions, Rain wears women's, men's, and everything non-labeled as far as clothing goes. Let's see, their work in conflict resolution has been highlighted internationally. Raindev has spoken at over 40 schools and universities on varying topics from homelessness, which they have experienced themselves, mental health, identity, poverty, positivity, and conflict resolution. Lastly, Rain operates a successful charity called Safebow, which evacuates vulnerable people out of war zones. This talk will be moderated by our very own Gabby Frick, an experienced project coordinator and manager at Power to Fly here, with specialties in content and leadership development through various training and workshop settings, skilled in developing tools and analytics for new systems and implementation, knowledgeable on diversity, equity, and inclusion principles, including cultural competency, allyship, unconscious bias, intercultural communication, and employee relations. So I will pass it over to you, Gabby and Rain. Thank you so much for being here.
Wow, thanks, Hunter, for that awesome intro. Rain, I feel like we could listen to your intro for an hour long. Very, very big welcome to you. We're really happy and excited to listen to what you have to say. And we want to hear you talk about nonviolent communication and conflict resolution. But before we get into that, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Raindev, rain like from the sky, dove like the bird. And my identity is that I am I. So I don't use any specific labels for myself. I let myself just exist as a series of actions and intentions, and being held to the consequences and rewards of my own actions and intentions, not necessarily summed up into a group homogeneously. I am a person who has a platform that's pretty large, given the fact that I started out as a model who modeled all things for all genders, as people might put it. But actually, the most rewarding work that I do is within conflict resolution, both in places that are physically volatile as well as psychologically volatile. And help guide people to a place where they can hopefully find some kind of peace within themselves or with the people that they are trying to resolve things with. And I just really came back from Ukraine about a few weeks ago, and it was one of the toughest but best times of my life.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And you have done this work clearly internally, but also this external work of nonviolence, which is really powerful, and they work hand in hand. So, we often think of violence though as being really physical or visible, right? So I would love for you to dive into, how do you define violence, and why would you say our world has violence in it, or why is our world violent?
That's a great question. In fact, actually, I pulled up this here just because I was going to read the definition of it and then break it down real quick. So violence actually is defined as behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. But it also is defined as strength of emotion or of a destructive natural force. The thing is that us being born is very much what we might consider to be a violent action. Violence comes in a lot of forms. It is taking something that exists and changing it. Violence can be a positive thing and a negative thing. It is the ripping of an entity or an idea or a mentality or a being into something that is possibly not going to return back to where it was. I think that as beings, when we come out into this world, we're trying to answer several questions. And one of those questions is, why were we here in the first place? And we try to quantify that with each other and where we stand with each other, where we sit with each other, where we can find a guaranteed meaning to our existence. And that breeds a lot of violence. That violence being that we are constantly trying to create relationships with people, both positive and negative, to better understand what our relationship is to ourselves. And so in a lot of ways, I would say that the most prevalent form of violence on the planet is not just the natural violence of our cells constantly shedding off from our body and destroying, and all the atomic, awesome scientific things that are happening as a planet, but actually I would say that the most prevalent form of violence on the planet is psychological violence. The questioning we have of ourselves every day and the questioning we have of the people around us. It makes it difficult to resolve conflicts. It makes it difficult to have resolve and for hope. And it makes it very difficult for us to feel that even when we're sure of ourselves, that we've ever got it really, truly figured out. It's hard to sit still because we're always being violent and ripping ourselves out into a place of discomfort. It's like we feel like we're not okay being okay. So that's why I think that the world is a little violent.
I love this concept of violence being innate and ingrained, right? I feel like there's this misconception with violence that it's external from us. It's happening externally, and then it's happening to us. But you're breathing some agency into this violence, right? And also breathing some normalcy and saying, we all experience the fact that we were born, and the fact that we're growing and we're changing is a violent process, which is something that I feel like doesn't get talked about enough. And I would love to hear more about what your thoughts are and what are some examples of this psychological violence that we're talking about, right? You spoke about the way in which we grow out of old things and into new things, right? There's this like death, birth, rebirth cycling, right, that we see in the world, right? Something needs to die, plant matter needs to die to create soil, to then fertilize the soil, to then create more plants, right? It's natural and it happens to everybody.
Yes.
But would love to hear what that looks like in terms of the psychological violence that you're speaking of.
Yeah, it's a good point about the plant matter. I mean, even just our own existence, we are constantly killing things to live. Whether that thing has, a heart that we can recognize, or whether, as a little plant being, it's struggled to get to the surface and we're shoving it down our throats. It's hard because we're born into the need to be violent in order to live, in order to take up space. I think there's a lot of guilt that we are naturally born with, because we are aware that our existence is only possible with the consumption of other people's existences and other things' existences and other stuff's existences. From what we wear to where we walk, it is really tough to exist and say, I am existing in a nonviolent way. But when it comes to psychologically, not only are we people who are existing, I would say, violently just by breathing, but I think we're also trying to kind of sort through our communal violence and violence that we've inherited genetically, violence that we've inherited from our family, the expectation that maybe we'll be better, that we're going to be the next generation. This generation's going to fix things. This generation's going to be better. This generation has got it figured out. This generation has got it easy. I think that we deal with a lot of social violence and pressure psychologically put on us. I think that we as ourselves look around and we're told that, you are a woman, for example, right? You might use the term, this person is a woman. And we're constantly using homogenous terms like that to sum up everybody by saying somebody's name, and then for the rest of the sentences, he or she. And when you sum someone up like that and you look around, you say, I don't look anything like this person. You start comparing yourself. What is this she? And why am I not she enough? And am I she enough? Am I he enough? When at the end of the day, we're actually very unique entities. So we have a lot of comparative internal violence. We also have, of course, resource violence, educational violence. We're growing up in a system in which somehow we've decided to put borders on this world that are enforced by governments, that have laws that we have to follow, that we might actually be a part of creating. When we vote, there's that violence. So I think we're sifting through a lot of psychological violence, trying to do the best that we can do, but also feeling maybe that no matter what we do, are we really ever at peace? And that's really tough. It's tough for people for many different reasons, never mind adding the obvious dealing with psychological obstacles that come with marginalization, that come with trauma, that come with other lived experiences. I think even if you're a person who society would deem to be very privileged financially or spatially or racially or sexuality or gender-wise, I think you still are a person who feels that at the end of the day, you are not at peace with yourself, you know?
Right. And being at peace, right? What does that mean? There's no absolute to these concepts of being at peace, or like, what does absolute violence look like, right? There's so much variance within this conversation that we're having, right? And when I think about what you're saying around violence, right? And everyone experiences violence in different ways. I'm curious, what is a way in which that you see through your work and through your personal work as well, how somebody who's on the receiving end of these societal external violences, how can we as people break that pattern and not perpetuate violence that is psychological, or perpetuate violence that we can control within ourselves?
Well, that's a huge question. There are so many things that remain in the way of us being able to truly let go and free fall. Part of the reason why I feel that so many religions have been so successful in the past is because it seems that many religions give people a formulaic way of being able to navigate through their life, because there are so many obstacles to us feeling like we're doing the right thing, or that we're okay, or that it will be okay, or that we're going to be forgiven when we're not okay. For me personally, you know, I always stumble and falter, just because I am known for being able to help people navigate certain circumstances doesn't necessarily mean that in my life I don't question things, or I don't feel fear, or I don't feel guilt. But I will say that for me personally, what I found is that I truly, truly trust whatever you want to call it, the universe, whatever this thing is that we're existing in. I truly trust it. And I've chosen to truly trust that all beings around me really believe that deep down in the heart, that they are the hero of their own story, that they are someone that can be loved or has something valuable to offer. And maybe not all people are healthy for me to be around. Maybe not all systems are healthy for me to live within. Maybe not all food is healthy for me to eat. But what I do believe is that if you can take a moment and truly believe that there is something good within all beings, something to connect with, something to find, then the world feels like a safer space. And for people who have a hard time believing that the world is a space that they can trust, you know, because it feels so violent, you know, every night we fall asleep. Not everyone, I suppose some people have a difficult time sleeping, but at some point you will sleep. And when you sleep, you do this thing where you are letting yourself do a trust fall into the world, knowing and believing to some extent that when you open your eyes, you'll still be there. That when you open your eyes, it will be okay, that you can let go and relinquish to the world around you. And that kind of feeling that we have with sleep, that's how I feel that if we could harness that trust fall and put it into our everyday lives, I believe that we would feel a little bit differently about how we engage with the people around us.
I love that. You should be a poet as well as everything else that you do. And it's surprisingly existential. I really love that you're coming at it in this way, that it's not just about what we can see in the violence that we have preconceived notions about. There's this connection to the wider world and to the wider universe, right? There is this existential philosophy that I think is the core of why I do this work as well, which I love to hear from you, Rain, is understanding that there's a piece of you that trusts in this process, that trusts other people, and just trusts in the positive and the good in the world. And that brings me to with ourselves, right? We're talking about this and why nonviolence is important, but I'm curious about what the goal of nonviolent communication is, right? So we talked about what this looks like within ourselves, but what does this look like when it comes to interpersonal relationships and nonviolent communication? What is that? What is the goal of that?
There's a lot of different goals behind, nonviolent communication, and it really is contingent upon the environment that you're in. For instance, if you're dealing with a physically violent situation, you may not want to engage in a way that exacerbates the physical violence by being physical yourself. So sometimes nonviolent communication is about engaging in a way that also doesn't mirror the actions of another being to prevent from giving permission from those actions continuing. There's also the element of nonviolent communication, which is instead of destruction, you're looking for growth. You're looking to create a long-term relationship, even if that relationship is a boundary. Nonviolent communication isn't all about making peace with somebody and sitting down and having dinner. Sometimes it's about creating a clear, understood boundary with somebody in a way that is mutual. Nonviolent communication, I find, within that mutual element is, I think, for me, it's about respecting myself. And I know that may feel a little narcissistic to some people, but when I use nonviolent communication, part of me is trusting that this other being is a being that deserves some kind of trust, and that if given something different in their life, maybe they will choose something different as well. And I believe personally, for me, for nonviolent communication, what I'm saying to them is that I am a person who is not your problem. I'm not a threat. I'm not a person who will threaten you. I'm not a person you have to fear. And by simply existing in a way that is as nonviolent as possible, I don't give permission for them to be violent towards me. It is what I believe one of the biggest reasons why, for instance, gay marriage was won in several nations around the world. There was this thing where, yes, protests helped bolster our power and our confidence as a community to come together through Stonewall. But gay marriage was brought to us by a lot of our allies who sat with us and saw that we are people that are just trying to exist and live in our lives. And just that simple existence is one of the best forms of resistance. We no longer are an example of something that must be murdered. We become a question mark or a possibility of what could be. And that can be really hard, but it's worth it.
So there's this aspect of bringing curiosity to the forefront as well, as saying, okay, you might be perpetuating this violence, but I'm going to be who I am and make you curious about me. Because when you're curious, you're less defensive, right? You want to explore this other person in front of you. So I love that. And so you're saying this goal of nonviolent communication is not always necessarily to stop this other person from being violent. Hopefully that's the end goal, but there's an aspect of just having that question mark. So having them just question themselves, maybe question who you are, question the relationship that you have, and bring them to that curiosity aspect, which I love. And you kind of touched, go ahead.
I was going to say, and also one of the things about nonviolent communication is it's an incredibly psychological thing. It's an ethos. It's a way of existing. So whenever you're using it, it's done with intention. And when you enter and engage into a conflict with intention, you're in control, which makes it harder for someone to truly abuse you, harder for someone to really hurt you, because you have a space that you've created that cannot be taken away, because that space is no longer your body, it's your mind. I think it's a very, very powerful thing to have access to, is knowing that you're going into a space with a choice. Because what makes violence so impactful on us and so traumatic is the fact that we feel like we don't have choices. They're taken away by someone's physicality or by somebody's words. But when we bring some sense of choice into a space, there's something that gives us a feeling of power.
Yeah. So there's this mental shift, right? It's not just the practice itself, the practice of nonviolent communication. There's this mental shift in saying, I have the power now, and self-empowerment, and understanding that you have the power to be in that space and set that space or leave that space in a sense. And you sort of touched on this, but I'm really curious, especially in the face of conflict or provocation, how does a nonviolent communicator respond, right? Say you're in a space and you still have that mentality, but you're getting pushed, right? Or somebody's digging at you, or somebody is trying to break down those walls, right? Because that's what the boundary is. You're talking about boundaries, and somebody is there just trying to get at your core. In that face of conflict, what does a nonviolent communicator do? How do they respond?
Well, once again, different conflicts can have different, because sometimes you have to have a really fast response time. One of the great things that I learned, I went to this really great place where people were teaching about self-protection during physical riots and things like that. And they're like, what is a nonviolent way for you to protect yourself when somebody is coming at you physically, right? And you have to react immediately. And they're like, run at me as fast as you can. And the person runs at this individual. And then the individual goes, oh my gosh, you have a bee on your face. And the person's like, what? Ah. And basically the point is that, there are times in which a nonviolent communicator doesn't get to do what a nonviolent communicator normally does, which is, not everyone has two eyes, not everyone has two ears, not everyone has two hands. There's an old expression from where I come from, is a little ableist, so I'm going to honor it as that, but I'm going to also talk about it because it's a very, very old way of thinking. The idea is that oftentimes people are born with two of a lot of different things: two ears, two eyes, two nostrils, and two hands. And that's because there was an intention from some greater creator that you would do those things twice as much as you would with your one mouth, right? Now, this, of course, is a little bit problematic from the ableism side, but at the same time, I do believe that really does apply with I do believe that does apply very much with nonviolent communication, which is oftentimes the goal is to first establish a safe space for yourself. You can't engage with someone unless you're on your, you're in a space that's safe for yourself. So if you have to remove yourself, it's better that you remove yourself than engage if you don't feel safe. Once you take your space, nonviolent communicators tend to observe and listen before they act. So you're not, you're not a person who is playing offense, you're a person who's playing defense. And then for me personally, my style of nonviolent communication is to, instead of answering people with absolute statements, I like to answer people with questions and get their minds thinking, get their minds moving, get their minds going back to them. What is their intention? What is their end goal? What do they want? Are they okay? What do they need? Who are they? The goal is partially to reshift the energy and the conversation, but also to kind of gain control in a way that that doesn't answer to their original intention. So if their original intention is to hurt them, instead of telling them that you are hurt or that they are hurting you, actually bringing it back to them. Why are they interested in hurting you? Why are they interested in kind of taking up this space in your life? How was their day today? I love surprising questions, by the way. When people confront me in a very volatile way, I like to ask people randomly when they're going off at me in a way that I feel is unsafe. I'll be like, have you ever been to McDonald's? Because sometimes for me personally, and everyone has a different reason for using nonviolent communication. Therapists oftentimes use nonviolent communication. People in Red Cross use nonviolent communication. Diplomats who are working to try to prevent nuclear war using nonviolent communication. But for me personally, my goal in using nonviolent communication is simply to get somebody to slow down or stop what they're doing, to reassess, and to realize I'm not a threat.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Their own questions. That's really important. It's hard for people to educate people who are not listening when they first start. So you need people to answer those questions for themselves. You need people to tell themselves and educate themselves. So that's where the questions come in.
Right. And that's a lot of work on your end, right? There's a nonviolent communication takes intention. We're going to come back to that where you said that in the beginning. It's you're showing up with intention, but that takes work and sort of the self-preservation, right? So
Yeah.
this work of saying, okay, I need to show up and continually practice nonviolent communication. And so I have some questions for the audience I would love for you to answer as well. The first being, can you explain the importance of human connection and nonviolent communication? I think we're touching on it, but would love to hear a little more explicitly what that looks like from you.
Well, everyone has their own relationship to the world and how they think the world works. And everyone has their own forms of spirituality or science or humanity or however you want to put it. But for me personally, I spent a good amount of time alone in my life. I grew up an only child in the middle of nowhere, pretty impoverished, didn't really have a lot of social engagements. And I spent a lot of my time homeless as well, being nothing, feeling that if I were to ask for help, that I would be an inconvenience. And that made it really difficult for me to at first feel that I wanted a connection with humanity, a humanity that I felt like had ignored me. And so I had ignored myself. But I've also been a person who hasn't always done great things in my life. I've lied, stolen, cheated, manipulated. I've done some amazing things, but I also haven't always been the best being. And I haven't always been as educated as I could be about things. I've had so much growth and I tried to fight it. I tried to fight the world. I tried to fight people who made me upset. I tried to fight myself. I tried to sit in places where I wasn't necessarily educated on something and stand by it because I was trying to tell people I'm a good person, but really what I was doing was actually telling them that what they were telling me was not something I wanted to hear. And at some point, I stopped trying to make everybody be a being that I wanted them to be. And I thought about the thing that made me feel the best about myself, which was when people truly took the time to believe, even if they couldn't see it, to believe that at the end of the day, I'm just trying to survive this planet. I'm trying to be a good person. I really, really am. And I don't always get it right. And when I see people who aren't always in their best spaces, I stop trying to see myself in them. Instead, what I do is I see that this being is a being that I'm going to have to spend time with on this planet, that this is a being who they will have this engagement with me, but then after that, they're going to go off to another world of people. For instance, if I'm dealing with somebody who doesn't accept their trans kid's identity, I can fight with them online in the safety of my own home and block them on Instagram. But at the end of the day, that person's going to go home and they're going to be dealing with their child, with other trans people in their lives. And so I look at that connection very deeply.
It's a calling in moment, right? It's like,
yes.
It's instead of shunning and shaming and blaming, there's this like compassion and calling in to say, if I don't call you in, you're still going to be in this world. We're still going to be connected in some sort of way. So this is the best possible outcome, is to bring you in and have this conversation and be nonviolent. And hopefully the best possible outcome comes from this. I love that. I have some more questions. I'm getting great questions from the audience, and I know we only have about 4 minutes left. So
I'll go as fast as I can. I'm a fast talker.
Do it. Yeah, let's rapid fire. So the first one is there any kind of ethical instructions that exist about applying nonviolent communication?
There are a lot of incredible people who've written a lot of incredible books, and it's really easy to go and Google. I would say that every walk of life, every existence, every space has different ideas about what ethical is and what it isn't, especially different intersectionalities in different marginalized communities. They have different needs and different desires. So I would say, pay attention to the world around you, really listen to what people want, what they need, listen to what you want, what you need, and do your best, otherwise just read and read and read as much as you can, especially stuff that has existed prior to the 20th century, because this mentality has existed since the beginning of humanity.
Yeah, love that. Right. This is nothing new, but hopefully can be resurfaced in many ways. Thank you. Next question, which I love, from Remy. What are the ways our privilege might get in the way of utilizing nonviolent communication?
I think that that's a great question. One of the difficult things is that at times we can come into a space and come across as condescending. A good example would be like when people were violent during the protest for Black Lives Matter, and trying to be seen and be heard. And that violence was the product of people who hadn't been seen or heard and had to do something to be seen or heard. And there were people who didn't quite understand the importance of that violence, right? And we had a lot of people speaking on behalf of people, thinking that they were helping to de-escalate a situation by being nonviolent, when in that situation, people needed to have the right to express themselves, however you feel about that. I also think that privilege can get in the way when sometimes we aren't able to see beyond ourselves. We think we're being nonviolent and we go in with the agenda of like, I'm better than you, I'm going to diffuse this situation. And that kind of sense of like the kind of thing that people joke about veganism having sometimes people say about nonviolent communicators, this holier than thou thing. You have to let go of that and you have to say, not holier than thou, thou is thou, for thou, and we are all working because we're going to spend our thou-ness on this planet, but that can really get in the way because we can feel that by being nonviolent that we are morally more superior to other people, and that is very problematic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So there's an ego aspect to nonviolent communication if you allow it to be, in saying it's the antithesis of what the goal to nonviolent communication is, right? Is right. Kind of saying, yeah, like I'm better, I'm best because I'm practicing this. So that's some great insights on that, and I see a lot of that in DEI work and allyship as well, as saying I done my research, I have my education, and so I'm going to let y'all know how to do this.
Yeah.
So we see that a lot, and we have 1 minute, but I have so many questions, but I have one more to wrap this up. Would love to hear about your charity and how our audience can get involved and learn more about it.
Absolutely. I have a nonprofit called Safebow.org. Safebow is an incredible organization that was created by y'all. Literally, it's run by people all around the world on a volunteer basis, and we are actively evacuating people out of war zones. We started with Ukraine, and of course, we are expanding out. I just really came back from being on the ground in Ukraine, evacuating trans people and HIV positive gay men because they can't leave the country because they have an M on their birth certificate. And I got arrested doing that job. I was put in jail. I came out. It was the most rewarding experience in my life, but it's very difficult and the work is still ongoing. We desperately need any financial support, but if you could just share our website on your page, safebow.org, we have a place you can donate there, or you can get involved. If you even have 5 minutes of your day, you can help with this evacuation process.
Wow, so much. We are so grateful to have your expertise and your insights that you shared today, Rain. Thank you so much, and I hope to speak with you soon.
Same. Thank you so much. You're amazing.
Yeah, take care. Bye, y'all.